It's a Good Life by Jerome Bixby, Part 4. They started arriving around 8 o'clock. By that time, Mom and Aunt Amy had a big table in the dining room set and two more tables off to the side. The candles were burning and the chairs situated, and Dad had a big fire going in the fireplace. The first to arrive were the Sipiches, John and Mary. John wore his best suit, as well scrubbed and pink-faced after his day in McIntyre's pasture. The suit was neatly pressed, but getting threadbare at elbows and cuffs. Old McIntyre was working on a loom, designing it out of school books, but so far it was slow going. McIntyre was a capable man with wood and tools, but a loom was a big order when you couldn't get metal parts. McIntyre had been one of the ones who, at first, had wanted to try to get Anthony to make things the villagers needed, like clothes and canned goods and medical supplies and gasoline. Since then, he felt that what happened to the whole Terrence family and Joe Keeney was his fault, and he worked hard trying to make it up to the rest of them. And since then, no one had tried to get Anthony to do anything. Mary Sipich was a small, cheerful woman in a simple dress. She immediately set about helping Mom and Aunt Amy with the finishing touches on the dinner. The next arrivals were the Smiths and the Dunns, who lived right next to each other down the road, only a few yards from the nothingness. They drove up in the Smiths' wagon, drawn by their old horse. Then the Rileys showed up from across the darkened wheat field, and the evening really began. Pat Riley sat down at a big upright in the front room and began to play from the popular sheet music on the rack. He played softly, as expressively as he could, and nobody sang. Anthony liked piano playing a lot, but not singing. Often he would come up from the basement or down from the attic, or just come and sit on top of the piano, nodding his head as Pat played Lover or Boulevard of Broken Dreams or Night and Day. He seemed to prefer ballads, sweet-sounding songs. But the one time somebody had started to sing, Anthony had looked over from the top of the piano and done something that made everybody afraid of singing from then on. Later, they decided that a piano was what Anthony had heard first, before anybody had ever tried to sing. And now anything else added to it didn't sound right and distracted him from his pleasure. So every television night, Pat would play the piano, and that was the beginning of the evening. Wherever Anthony was, the music would make him happy and put him in good mood, and he would know that they were gathering for television and waiting for him. By 8:30, everybody had shown up, except for the 17 children and Mrs. Soames, who was off witching them in the schoolhouse at the far end of town. The children of Peaksville were never allowed near the Fremont house. Not since little Freddie Smith had tried to play with Anthony there. The younger children weren't even told about Anthony. The others had mostly forgotten about him, or were told that he was a nice goblin, but they must never go near him. Dan and Ethel Hollis came late, and then walked in not suspecting a thing. Pat Riley had played the piano until his hands ached. He'd worked pretty hard with them today. And now he got up, and everybody gathered around to wish Dan Hollis a happy birthday. "Well, I'll be darned," Dan grinned. "This is swell. I wasn't expecting this at all. Gosh, this is swell." They gave him his presents, mostly things they had made by hand, though some were things that people had possessed as their own and now gave him as his. John Sipich gave him a watch charm, hand-carved out of a piece of hickory wood. Dan's watch had broken down a year or so ago, and there was nobody in the village who knew how to fix it, but he still carried it around because it had been his grandfather's and was a fine old heavy thing of gold and silver. He attached the charm to the chain, while everybody laughed and said John had done a nice job of carving. Then Mary Sipich gave him a knitted necktie, which he put on, removing the one he'd worn. The Rileys gave him a little box they had made to keep things in. They didn't say what things, but Dan said he'd keep his personal jewelry in it. The Rileys had made it out of a cigar box, carefully peeled off its paper and lined on the inside with velvet. The outside had been polished and carefully, if not expertly, carved by Pat, but his carving got complimented too. Dan Hollis received many other gifts: a pipe, a pair of shoelaces, a tie pin, a neat pair of socks, some fudge, a pair of garters made from old suspenders. He unwrapped each gift with vast pleasure and wore as many of them as he could right there, even the garters. He lit up the pipe and said he never had a better smoke, which wasn't quite true because the pipe wasn't broken in yet. Pete Manners had had it lying around ever since he'd received it as a gift 4 years ago from an out-of-town relative who hadn't known he'd stopped smoking. Dan put the tobacco into the bowl very carefully. Tobacco was precious. It was only pure luck that Pat Riley had decided to try to grow some in his backyard just before what had happened to Peaksville had happened. It didn't grow very well, and then they had to cure it and shred it and all, and it was just precious stuff. Everybody in town used wooden holders old McIntyre had made to save on butts. Last of all, Thelma Dunn gave Dan Hollis the record she had found. Dan's eyes misted even before he opened the package. He knew it was a record. "Gosh," he said softly, "what one is that? I'm almost afraid to look." "You haven't got it, darling," Ethel Hollis smiled. "Don't you remember I asked about you or my sunshine?" "Oh, gosh," Dan said again. Carefully he removed the wrapping and stood there fondling the record, running his big hands over the worn grooves with their tiny, dulling crosswise scratches. He looked around the room, eyes shining, and they all smiled back, knowing how delighted he was. "Happy birthday, darling," Ethel said, throwing her arms around him and kissing him. He clutched the record in both hands, holding it off to one side as she pressed against him. "Hey," he laughed, pulling back his head. "Be careful, I'm holding this priceless object." He looked around again over his wife's arms, which were still around his neck. His eyes were hungry. "Look, do you think we could play it? Lord, what I'd give to hear some new music. Just the first part, the orchestra part, before Como sings." Faces sobered. After a minute, John Sipich said, "I don't think we'd better, Dan. After all, we don't know just where the singer comes in. It would be taking too much of a chance. Better wait till you get home." Dan Hollis reluctantly put the record on the buffet with all his other presents. "It's good," he said, automatically but disappointedly, "that I can't play in here." "Oh yes," said Sipich, "it's good." To compensate for Dan's disappointed tone, he repeated, "It's good." End of part 4.